Hello again, and welcome to another episode of the Future of Sales Show. I'm your host, Sahil Mansouri, founder and CEO of Bravado. And with me today is a guest that I'm so excited to have on, someone who's readily and quickly become one of my dear friends, and someone who is now a published author as well, Bryan Signorelli. I'm sure that takes some getting used to, Bryan, to have that attached to your name.
Yeah, what I really want is for my brothers to start referring to me as this is my published author brother, Bryan. That's like where it, becomes real and where I really relish in that. But no, I mean, yeah, I don't know how many people have referred to me as a published author, but
you certainly are. I have the book. I was going to bring it for the purpose of this show so I could hold it up and demo it. But I have even better news. I read it and I liked it so much that I shared it with another Bravado member who was actually asking me some questions about, in a world, and we'll get into why and how. But quickly, so Bryan Signorelli is the head of the sales partner program at HubSpot and the author of Inbound Marketing: How to Change the Way You Sell to Match How People Buy, which is a fantastic book. If you haven't had a chance to check it out, I think by the end of this episode, you're certainly going to want to, because Bryan's the man and talks about a lot of stuff that I think we hold very near and dear to our hearts here at Bravado, and themes that you've seen across a number of other episodes here as well. But Bryan, welcome to the Future of Sales Show, and so excited to have you here, man.
I'm pumped to be on with you. This is great. Things have just developed so rapidly in our relationship. I feel like it was only a couple of, months ago that Derek Wazinski, who wrote the concluding chapter, which is actually called The Future of Sales,
That's
I believe. He introduced me to you, and here we are. And it's great to have synced up with you, despite the fact that we're separated by, a few thousand miles from coast to coast. No big deal.
Or one tiny line on the screen, depending.
One tiny line. That's what 3,000 miles is now. It's nothing. So yeah, it's been great to get to know you a bit, and I've been psyched to learn all about Bravado and what you guys have been up to, and to be a guest to chat with you today.
Cool. So first, maybe just for some context for our audience, what the heck is a global sales partner program at HubSpot? What does that mean that you exactly do?
Yeah, so what we should have probably named it, the reason we call it the sales partner program is that we have 3 different major product lines at HubSpot. We have a marketing hub, which is a set of marketing automation tools. We have a sales hub, which is a set of, it's a CRM, and it's kind of sales engagement or sales acceleration tools, however you kind of think about that. And then we also have a service hub, which is basically for customer success and customer service. And so anyway, when we started building out what is the sales partner program, that was designed to be a partner program for businesses who would layer services on top of our sales products. So really it should be called kind of like a CRM integrator or like CRM partner program, kind of similar to, like the way a Salesforce partner might work, or a Dynamics partner, things like that. That's the kind of, ilk from which the program was, or the cloth from which the program was cut, rather.
Got it. Awesome. So, one of the things that I learned very early on in our conversations is that your perception and perspective of the profession of sales is very unique. And I think you have a unique story into how you got into sales, which you talk about in the book. I'd love if you could share a little bit of that, because one of the things that we found is that, of 4,000 universities in the United States, less than 100, I think 70 odd, have a major in sales. And the reason why I find that particularly alarming is that sales is the number 3 most common job out of undergraduate for someone starting out their career. It's the 3rd most common profession for someone fresh out of school. Yet There's no majors around it. There's no training around it, right? Every person I've ever met, myself included, accidentally fell into sales, right? And sales has this weird negative stigma around it, and there's this whole thing of, obviously address this a lot in the book as well, but maybe you can start by sharing a little bit of your background in sales, and then also kind of how you think about the profession as a whole.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I try to keep this tight. So when I graduated from school, I, like most people, had no idea what it was that I wanted to do. And I had a friend who was a couple of years ahead of me, I was a senior and he had graduated, I think 2 years ahead of me. And he was working at this company in Washington, DC called the Corporate Executive Board, which is now Gartner, actually acquired by Gartner, I think about a year ago. And he said, yeah, like you get to work with Fortune 500 executives and do research and write like white papers and case studies. And, you get to learn about like the best practices and best solutions to the world's biggest management challenges. And you should come work for us. I'm like, that sounds cool. Like, what would I do for them? It's like, well, we'll train you. You'll write white papers and case studies, and you'll take like research calls and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, all right, whatever, like sounds good. And then I ended up basically doing like advisory work for like chief technology officers and heads of R&D, which like I didn't even have an engineering degree. So I had no business doing this whatsoever. I could listen, usually. I could write okay at best. And, I guess I had enough kind of like natural curiosity that just, and I was open enough to being trained. They say that like, the main purpose of a liberal arts degree is like not to learn anything, but it's like to learn how to learn or something like that. Yeah. So I felt like, I guess I was somewhat set up well to do that. And, fast forwarding through this, like as a research analyst, I got exposed to the sales team there because what would happen is like the research analyst, like Gartner's a professional services firm, right? Mm-hmm. And in a professional services firm, the equivalent of a sales engineer is an analyst, basically. Mm-hmm. And so the sales reps would bring me onto calls and they'd say, well, we have they give me some ridiculous title. Like we have the managing director of our research, blah, 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 that could talk to you about, setting up a global or managing global R&D teams. And here I am 23 years old and I knew what I was talking about, but I only knew about it because I talked to tons of other, chief technology officers at huge companies who had done this. And I was just kind of playing back those sound bites as, like a monkey or whatnot. And I don't know, like I just observed the way these salespeople were selling and I was just like, my jaw just hit the floor. I'm like, this is awful. I can't believe that this works. And then I got mad because I was thinking like, I knew they got paid like 3 times or more as much as what I was getting paid. Oftentimes way more than that even. And I'm like, this is bullshit. Like I'm doing all the work. I'm creating all the value. You're just and on top of that, like I'm kind of selling for you because, you're just getting people on the phone, but I'm the one doing all the talking and sharing all the insight and all that stuff. Right. Like, hard work, right? Probably the same, dichotomy or relationship that exists between at a software company between engineers and sales reps today. Sure. In a way, right? So anyway, kind of fast forward. I didn't like sales then. I then went to go work at a startup. I hated sales even more, being a buyer and observing more and more sales processes. And then eventually someone said, you should talk to, because I was supposed to be running all of sales and marketing for this startup, and I had no business doing that, no idea what I was doing. But I thought, I'm like, my arrogant 25-year-old self thought, oh, those salespeople, like that's such an easy job. I can easily do that. And marketing, like whatever, like how hard can marketing possibly be? Of course, I was dead wrong in so many different ways, and it's incredibly difficult. Both of those disciplines and functions are incredibly difficult, but I didn't know any better. And so our sales and marketing was going horribly. And someone said, why don't you talk to HubSpot? They have a kind of different take on sales, different take on marketing. And for the first time, I was kind of exposed to an entirely different sales process. I'm happy to elaborate on that, but like that's when my mind started to change about sales. So much so that I kind of fell in love with the company, and I've sort of had this kind of like, I guess, 7-year love affair ever since then. I was a customer for a year, and then I went to go work for HubSpot, and I became a sales rep in the process. So I kind of went from, hater to lover overnight or something.
It's so interesting. There's so many parts of that story that I want to dig into. There's so much there that's really interesting. But I think if I were to segment out what you said into a couple of different components, I would say that the first part is the realization that the profession of sales can be done well and it can be done poorly. And most of the time it's done really poorly and it ruins it for everyone else. And then when you do it well, it's such an exceptional experience that those companies and those people just win. That's been my experience as well. I had the exact opposite track as you, where I started out in sales. I spent an entire career, both as an individual contributor, as a sales manager, as a director of sales, a VP of sales, a CRO, eventually VP of sales and marketing. And I kind of, same sort of tipping point. And then I actually ended up on the product side and I became a buyer and completely removed from the world of sales. And that was my big awakening of like, holy shit, like most salespeople suck, because as a sales rep, you don't interact that much with other salespeople in a professional context. As a personal context, I mean, salespeople run like any other team does, right? You run with your pack, and that's just the way it goes. And so Most of my friends were sales reps, but I had never had the experience of having to go through multiple qualification calls. I had never had the experience of having had 5 or 6 different account executives from competitive technologies pitching me to try and get me to buy their software. And once you go through that experience, you realize just how fucking annoying salespeople can be. And I say that not as somebody who doesn't love salespeople. In fact, I mean, it would be asinine for me to be building Bravado if I didn't love sales and salespeople. It's the fact that I hate sales done poorly. And a friend of mine, Kevin Walkup, who's a sales rep at a company called SalesLoft, likes to say, if you take a shortcut, you'll always end up cut short. And I feel like sales is very much like that, where there's just a lot of shortcuts taken. Someone says, "Oh, I've been doing research on your business." "Oh, really? What did you find?" Like, "Oh, well, it looks like you're hiring for a lot of positions." That's interesting. We don't have a hiring page. Like we don't have an open job. So where did you do this research? And it's just so glib for people to lie. And I think that one of the things that struck you early on in your career was the relative lack of integrity and just a general sense of dishonesty that surrounds the profession of sales. Where does that come from? It seems very symptomatic specifically to sales. Where does that come from? And why haven't we gotten rid of it yet?
Wow. I mean,
I'm just giving you the easy questions.
Yeah, I mean, easy, the softballs.
Yeah.
No. I mean, I love, this is the stuff I love. I think it was driven by a few things. Like what's really interesting. I'll keep it simple. I get trapped into making things way too complex sometimes. Like I genuinely think that the sales profession is still living through this like 20-year hangover of how sales used to work before buyers were empowered with information. Mm-hmm. What do I mean by that? The year, let's just call it 2000 just for sake of simplicity.
Sure.
This is when the internet started to really take hold and become mainstream in many homes, many businesses, and there's just like amazing Katie Couric clip that I think it was from like late 90s. Have you ever seen this where she's on and it's like on the Today Show and she's like, "Hey, can we have someone come on and tell us what internet is?" Right? And to us today, you're like, okay, that's hilarious. And of course, it's the internet, right? Or just call it Google. However you want to think about it. But anyway, this company that you might be familiar with, being in San Francisco, this company called Google came along and really, with a variety of others, in fairness, and really democratized access to information. That was a big deal. Like, we forget, especially anybody who is younger than we are. I think that like you and I are probably right on the cusp of this. But we're just old enough to remember what life was like before the internet was really mainstream. Like, you wanted to find information, you had to like get it from the television, get it from the newspaper. You actually opened your doors when someone knocked on the door, right? Like, people just going door to door. You'd like usually pick up, like, getting a phone call at home was actually a big deal. This is like before cell phones. Like, the phone would ring.
Right.
You hate getting them during dinner. Like, your parents, maybe, you know, if you did that thing, like, you know, you had family dinner, like, parents complained, like, oh, like, damn it, those phone calls during dinner.
Yeah.
Right. That was a thing. Like, that's, and then if you wanted to like write a research paper, you know, or had to do like a term paper for school or something, or a research project, damn it, you went to the library.
Yeah. What a concept.
What a concept, right?
Yeah.
Today, it's all right here. Right? All of that. Anything you need is right here. And I think that's the long and the short of it, is that, you know, pre-2000, buyers in general did not have access to information. Okay. Sellers had all the control. Fast forward, you know, what is happening and happened over the last, say, 18 years is that buyers are taking control back. And I think they've actually already taken a lot of that control back. And I think that, frankly, the kind of crap behavior that you see still happening today is a result of the fact that there are a bunch of people now who are probably in their 40s, 50s, and 60s who were trained in sales before the information revolution, so to speak, before that democratization. They are unfortunately just training, and I don't blame them. They're training today's sales force the way that they were trained before the internet happened, so to speak, you know? And so I kind of personally think that the sales profession is living this hangover of yesteryear's sales process and sales training. And I think in another 10 years, it's going to look extremely different, maybe even the next 5. I think it's already starting to look a lot different. People are just now kind of catching on to the concept of like inbound selling, social selling, even a challenger sale is kind of a new framework, and all about taking control of a conversation, delivering insight, realizing that the buyer has so much control in where and how they access and when they access information. That's the long and the short of it, in my opinion.
Okay, so I'll challenge you on that a little bit, because I think generally what you said is obviously true, right? Which is that buyers have control, have all the information, you know, whether you use third-party sites on a professional scale of the Gartners and the Cirrus Decisions and the Forresters, you use the up-and-comers like the Trust Radius and G2 Crowd and whatnot, type crowdsourced reviews, whether you go and download case studies off of websites and download content there, whether you're able to easily use LinkedIn to reach out to your network in order to build a framework or a kind of like a wisdom from your friends of like, what have you used? How's it worked? Right. Across the board, right? Across all of those boards, you have access to more information than you ever did. Great. I believe you. But over the course of the last 5 years, 7 years, we've had the rise of the SDR. And in some way, that seems to be very counter to what you just said, right? So if we've had the rise of a class of an entirely new profession in sales, because this was never a thing that existed specifically in software sales, at least not in this way, definitely not with this level of prevalence, except for the last 5 to 7 years. You have technologies like SalesLoft and Outreach and whatnot that are powering this world. You now have an army of 22 to 27-year-olds who are sitting there all day, sending emails, making calls, and basically firing out, thousands and thousands of messages in order to get the first, few hundred, few thousand customers for a business. Sometimes beyond that, even. So how does that work? How do you at once have far more informed buyers and at the same time an army of junior sellers who are out there like firing outbound cold messaging? How does that work?
Yeah, so I mean, what's really interesting about that, I think it's a fair point, is I would actually use that data point as a piece of evidence to supplant the notion that sales is getting harder. If sales were getting easier, I don't think you'd see all these companies hiring armies of SDRs. If sales were getting easier, I don't think that you would have seen literally in the last 2 or 3 years, we've seen an explosion in the sales technology space.
Mm-hmm.
The landscape has gone from like, I don't know, maybe 100 or so software tools to almost 1,000.
Yeah, sure.
This is backed by $10 billion of venture capital.
Mm-hmm.
That space is ballooning much in the same way that the marketing space ballooned from, say, 2009 to 2015. Like there was this kind of marketing renaissance. I think we're going through a little bit of a sales renaissance too, in a way, in terms of like all this explosion. So I think that those things just support the fact that that sales is getting harder, and I think, tying it back to the idea of like, why do bad sales reps still exist? Which I think was, one of the original points we touched on. I think it's tied, in addition to the fact, in my opinion, that, the dynamic between buyer and seller changes. Like kind of pre-2000, seller has all the control. Post-2000, buyer has not all the control, but like a lot of control, or at least way more control than they ever had before. So that's like the dynamic that's kind of the paradigm shift, so to speak. But I think it's also driven by, and I think that, and then as the buyer gets more control, sales as a function is fundamentally getting harder. So you see the rise in hiring these armies of SDRs, mostly inside sales, the shift away from outside sales, it's an explosion of sales technology. And then I think, the other things that are driving this kind of bad sales behavior is, this might be blasphemous, but I'll say it. I think quotas are one of the primary reasons that you have bad sales behavior. I mean, I could touch on things like, hey, we don't have professional standards, right? We don't have like a sales certification that every single salesperson has to go through. We don't have like a code of ethics that like every salesperson needs to adhere to, the same way that people in financial services, God bless them, my whole family's in financial services, financial services are supposed to go through, or lawyers or doctors, etc. Like we just don't treat the profession the same way. You could argue that. You could argue like, and I love that point too about, hey, you know what? Sales is not being taught in undergraduate institutions, yet it's the third most common job someone's going to have. I think that's absolutely part of it too. But I think at the end of the day, just my opinion, I actually think quotas are a huge part of the problem, if not the entire problem. Okay, so
one of the things I love about talking to you is that we could literally talk about any topic and get so nerdy and deep with it. I haven't had this conversation yet, and I've been dying to have it. So you inadvertently touched the third rail on this one, because this is something that fascinates me, which is to say that yesterday I was at a VC here in San Francisco hosted a sales summit that I attended, and they had a panel of these like extraordinary sales leaders who came and spoke. Sales leaders from companies like Glassdoor and Marketo and SAP and Salesforce and whatnot, App Dynamics. And they're sitting there and they're talking about how to build a winning sales culture and all these things. And they're sharing their insights. And one of the things that they asked was that we not publicly share the things that they said, because they wanted it to be kind of a confidential conversation in the room for sales leaders. And so I'll adhere to that and won't get into the minutia of what they said. But one of the things that came up was compensation. And I asked the question, I was like, hey, they were talking about how you want to build a comp plan that's extremely aggressive and that rewards your top performers, and that you want no more than 45 to 50% of your reps hitting plan. And, if you hit above plan, we want to pay you like 200% of your OTE or 300% of your OTB and pay millions of dollars. But you got to be above the line. And if you're not above the line, you're out, right? Feast or famine, kill or be killed, sort of raw sales culture. And I'm just listening to this and I'm thinking to myself, imagine if instead of this audience being a room full of sales leaders, this was a room full of your customers. Like just imagine that, right? Imagine for 1 second if I had recorded that conversation and if I played it to your customers and I was like, this is how this company thinks about the way that their salespeople should be compensated, because these are the values and these are the behaviors that they want to incent, which is to say, we want to incentivize salespeople to like blow out their number. What does it mean to blow out your number, right? What does that actually mean? So let's talk about what that means. There's one of a couple ways you can blow out your number as a salesperson. One of the things you can do is you can either sell a lot more deals, right? You can increase the quantity of deal. But that means, but now, either that means that you're like a magical unicorn salesperson who is able to find every single qualified prospect in your territory and sell to them. If that's who you are, then great. But the majority of what that means is that you're really good at selling deals to people who otherwise shouldn't be buying your product or otherwise isn't a great fit, but you're really, really good at convincing the person that they should buy it. And so what that means is you have worst fitting customers that are joining your cohort of clients, and then you know that a certain percentage of those people are gonna churn, but you're willing to do that anyway because you want to increase top line revenue. So that's potentially what that means. The other thing that could mean is that this person's really good at selling either SKUs that the customer doesn't need, or is good at getting the customer to pay a higher price than they actually should be paying. Right? That's the other thing that means.
Yep.
There's only two ways you can blow out your number, right? More deals or bigger deals, right? Those are
right.
If it's bigger deals, then yes, the person could be a fantastic solution consultant who's able to get deep within each company and be able to create value across multiple organizations with the multiple teams with the same product and different use cases. And again, if you're that salesperson, I commend you, right? And I truly mean that. But for the majority of top performers, what it means is that you're really good at negotiating and you're really good at obfuscating the price and inflating it and putting bells and whistles in there that the customer doesn't really need, but that charges them a little bit more money. And I think that, this entire concept of commission-based salespeople and quotas is I just cannot believe that there has not been companies out there that have been like, we are not going to commission our salespeople. We're not going to offer quotas. We're not going to reward you based on the percentage of deals percentage of goal that you hit. But then it's almost like, so I asked the question, I was like, is there ever a world in which you can imagine a sales team not having a quota? And universally, all three of them are like, not between 0 and 100 million, right? Between 0 and 100 million, you have to have that. You need people to do, things to get the business, and you need to create that culture. Do you think that's true? I don't know. I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical whether that's true or not.
I don't know. I don't know. I really don't know the right answer to that. There are very, very, very few examples that I've been able to find, and I can assure you it's not from a lack of trying to find them. Atlassian is one of the only companies I have ever found that I can see who have done this, who have said there is no quota. There aren't even salespeople. There are, I think they call them like customer success engineers or something along those lines. And anyone listening to this, or really anytime I've ever even shared the Atlassian example, like all the sales gurus come out and they're like, yeah, but that's just tech. And yeah, that's a different buyer. And yeah, it's like a lightweight product. And they come out with every objection.
Of course. Right.
But if you watch, it's a really interesting video. I mean, for anyone who hasn't seen it, watch, I always get his name mixed up. It's Jay Simon. I think it's Jay Simon singular, not Simons. I think it's Jay Simon, the president of Atlassian. Watch, I think through YouTube you can find it. Watch Jay Simon's Startup Grind 2014. And he shows this video of exactly the story of how this came to be and what type of impact that has had on their business. And frankly, I think a lot of behavior is rooted in fear or in greed. in my opinion, I think those are some of the best human motivators that exist. So like, however, evolution kind of figured that one out. It's great because like they work, they drive action. I think what's holding people back from doing that is fear, or it's just that people are saying, I'm not afraid of it. Like, it's just like, I know that we're creating a bunch of shitty customer experience along the way. I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that level of bad karma, I guess, that's out there in the world. I'm okay with creating that waste. Maybe the rest of the world is too. I don't know. But what's interesting with that last Ian is like, and what I find interesting, because you've seen this, Sahil, working at different software companies. Usually, if you look at the trajectory of revenue throughout a month, it goes like this. It's like da 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 da. Like at the end, like 50% of the revenue comes in like the last 10% of the month. Sometimes like in the last day of the month.
Sure, always.
Right? And I've never analyzed those customers and said, I wonder if the customers that are sold, I wonder if there's any meaningful difference between the customers that are sold on the last day of the month and the customers that are sold on, say, the 15th of the month.
Okay, so what's amazing about that, and for those of you who are watching this, you're probably like, wow, these two have really done a lot of prep for this. I assure you, we did zero prep for this session. I read an article on this very topic yesterday. So I was sitting there and I was trying to think about this topic, and something that struck me was the fact that you push deals in at the end of a quarter. I was looking at it from a quarterly perspective at the time, but monthly it applies the same. And I was like, I wonder if those deals are worse deals or not. So Ken Krogh, who's the president of Inside Sales, wrote an article on HBR, Harvard Business Review, that specifically talks about this, that says that there's an 11 times greater probability that the deal that you close at the end of the month is more likely to churn than a deal that you close at the beginning. And you basically, what you're doing is you're pushing in customers that are A, not ready to buy, or B, are bad fits. And you're using the leverage of discounting, and you're using the leverage of fear and pressuring and this and that in order to cajole people who are not really ready to buy, but you get them to buy, and then you hit a gong and the whole sales team celebrates. But the problem with that is that in today's world, and this is where I see things changing, is that in today's world, we care so much more about retention. We care so much more about churn. We care about payback period, especially in SaaS. And so getting a customer to sign up on a discount today and then churning out that customer in 12 months actually loses the company money. You don't even it's not even break even that you can be like, yeah, well, the bookings number went up. You lose money on those deals.
Yep.
And forget about the payout to the salesperson, although that's certainly a part of it. I mean, we're just talking about the amount of effort and time and energy it takes your customer support people to have to deal with all the issues they're going to have, and the sales engineers, and then your product roadmap gets influenced because they want features that they were promised that they actually can't do. And I mean, it screws everything up. And it's this incredibly vicious cycle that we hit, which is that, we're addicted to the number. We're addicted to the hyper growth. Everyone wants to be a hyper growth startup, right?
Everyone wants to be a unicorn, right?
Everyone wants to be a unicorn. And yet, the reality is a lot of companies aren't ready for that yet. What they're ready for is to get a handful of customers to teach them what's wrong with their products, and then they're ready for their engineering team to make changes, and then maybe get a few more, and then maybe get a few more. But no one wants to do that. What everyone wants to do is just hit $1 million in MRR, and hit this, hit that, and get VC funding, and so I think it's this incredibly deleterious cycle that we're in. And to break free of it seems to require a whole-scale systemic change in the way we think about building a successful technology.
Yeah, I mean, I'll probably be blacklisted from the entire VC community for saying this, but I think the cause behind the cause on quotas is VC money. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying all VCs are bad. They're not. And I'm not saying the VCs are bad in general. It's not even that. It's just look, if I were a VC, I'd probably think the same way. But the reality is the way a VC manages money is they make a certain number of investments. They kind of spread that money around, And they know that 9 out of 10 of those, maybe more, are not going to make it. Mm-hmm. And so the day that they sign a check to any one of those companies that takes that VC money is the same day. And I remember this guy who created a very, very successful, and granted, this is like back in the 80s, he created a very successful, basically, I'm trying to think of the name of the business he was in. They basically provided like clothing to like the profession or to the hospitality industry, right? So like think of like all the uniforms you need to do, for, in the restaurants, all that stuff, right?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yes, the name of the company was called WearGuard. Mm-hmm. They were acquired by, I'll blank on the company, but I'll follow up with you on it. They were acquired for some company for like, $500 million or something like that. And they became successful through mail order catalogs, which was like the equivalent of inbound marketing in the 80s.
Right.
Okay, all right. It was innovative back then. I know it sounds crazy now, but that was like a big deal. Anyway, one of the things he said to me, because I was going through this process of unsuccessfully trying to raise VC money before I went to HubSpot. Uh-huh. He said, Bryan, be really careful because, if you are lucky enough to have a venture capital firm invest in this business, he said the same day they write you that check is the same day that a shotgun goes to the back of your head and they are just waiting to pull the trigger. And be very careful on that. And then that feeds down into the board. That feeds down to sales management. That feeds down to the sales reps. And then it doesn't end there because once you go public, then it's Wall Street, right? Mm-hmm. Which I'll get even more, more hate mail for probably. But, just bringing these things to light because this is how these are just my thoughts, just my opinions. Doesn't mean that I'm right or wrong. It's just what kind of goes through my head on these things.
Yeah, there's an article that I published on the Bravado blog that actually talks specifically about this topic. Again, I swear we didn't do a prep call for this. It's very, very interesting how we seem to be interested in the same things. And what you're referencing is the power law of VCs and how that works. And I think we've had a number of pieces of content that we've referenced throughout this. And what I'll do is actually grab all of those links and post them at the bottom in the comment section so that you can actually read through and reference any of the things we mentioned. But I think I agree with that as well, which is to say that, there's an expectation of hypergrowth when you accept venture capital. And then if, you're not able to manage those expectations properly and not set those expectations up front and not be transparent in your communication with your VC, then you're setting yourself up for failure. We are a VC-backed company and I will say that I have been incredibly lucky to work with a VC, who actually herself was a 2-time founder and has sat in my shoes at my stage in my seat and has felt this pain herself, and so, when we have conversations about this, she's very look, I know these are the expectations, but I understand the way you want to build the business. And I want to be respectful to that. And we are very candid with one another. And I have just so much appreciated, working with her. Now, that being said, that is not the rule, that is the exception. And I think that the majority of times in which I've worked as a sales leader at VC-backed companies, which I've done a few times now in my career, there has always been that expectation and that dread of the board meeting and that's pushing this behavior. And I can't even tell you how many times I was asked by the CEO of a company that will go unnamed to, either pull in a deal that should count for next month and do some weird thing on the contract so it looks like it counted for this month. And, the first time you get asked a request like that.
Oh, it's pervasive. So many companies, without naming any companies, I have countless stories of how many times, a sales manager would say something like, hey, you got anything for next week you can pull forward? You pull, I know it's post-dated for next month, but can you pull it into this month? We need it. Team needs it.
Yeah, team needs it, right? We need it, right? Which, and so, the level of dishonesty isn't just between the buyer and the seller. And I very much agree with that. I think we are internally dishonest with ourselves. And I think we are dishonest with our boss, which is often our board, and then within that communication channel as well. Look, at the end of the day, we are in a world in which people try to fake it until they make it. That's like that is like the strategy that most startups use, right? It's like just create enough of an aura around yourself so that so that people believe that you're more successful and bigger and better than you are. And then hopefully you'll live up to those expectations one day. But most of the time you don't, and you fail. And then that's like accepted too, right? In what you said, right? In your whole concept of 9 of 10 bets don't go well anyway. So knowing all of that, let's bring it back down to the individual salesperson, which is to say, I'm a sales rep. I'm living in this new modern world where VC money is everywhere. Hypergrowth is the table stakes to getting funded. I'm getting pressure from my leadership team to hit numbers. I've got a comp plan and a quota that incentivizes me to blow it out of the water, whatever that means. Then let's bring it back down to reality. I'm a salesperson talking to a customer, right? Mm-hmm. The customer is far more informed. The customer knows what other people have paid for the software. They have a much better understanding of just what your technical capabilities are. How do I balance that? Because at that point, I'm kind of serving two masters, right?
Yeah. I mean, like the quota thing. Look. I mean, there are things in your control, and things are out of your control. Exactly. I'm not saying that the oppressed salespeople of the world should rise up against, the quota setters. I'm not saying that. Be interesting if that happens someday, but I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. So I'm not advocating for that. So kind of realize that's probably out of your control. Like, you're going to have a number and you got to manage it. Okay. My opinion, the time that as a buyer, actually, when things clicked for me and I said, like, not all salespeople are shit. And I actually feel okay cutting a check for, like, maybe not anything, but like kind of whatever, was the first time that I dealt with HubSpot. I'm not saying that everyone at HubSpot does this necessarily. I'm just giving you an example because that's just one point of context, reference point of when that changed for me. Doesn't matter if it's HubSpot or other companies, but what HubSpot did was so different that I noticed it. Okay. And so my message for any sales rep today is, if you are following the playbook that a bunch of other sales reps before you have followed, you're probably not doing it the right way.
Right.
And I think if you couple that with, picking your head up, looking around, asking yourself, like, how do I buy in my personal life? What expectations do I have of other companies? Okay, so like, I'll give you a couple quick examples. Like, when you buy from Amazon, would you say it's a hard or easy experience? You're going to say it's the easiest. You're going to say, I have an addiction to Amazon. It's so easy.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so think about that for your buyer. Figure out, how do you make it as easy for them as possible? Think about, like, unexpected moments of delight. I'll give you another example. Uber. All right, I know Uber's a little bit in the doghouse recently, but whatever. One of the very first customer experiences I had with Uber was that they rounded my bill down to the next closest dollar. I said, I've never seen that before. It was like, my bill was like $15.16. And they're like, just call it 15. Like, that's great. That's amazing. I don't give a shit about the 16 cents. And the reality is they don't either. But what they created was someone who is now an Uber loyalist. I mean, granted, I'm one of, I don't know, millions or billions, whatever, using Uber now. But in a kind of unexpected moment of value or delight. The list goes on. I mean, think of Zappos free shipping, Amazon free shipping both ways, all these things, right? So look in your own personal life, think of how we're living. If I could sum it up, people say that we're living in the age of, or they've said we're living in the information age. We're like, buyers have access to all this information. I think we've actually transitioned out of the information age, and we're currently in the age of convenience, where we expect that everything is personalized, that it is easy, that it is fast, and that I can try a bunch of stuff before I buy it. Okay? And if you take some of those principles into your selling, I guarantee you are going to stand out significantly to any buyer. And I think you're going to build a bigger pipeline than any sales manager could ever ask you to build, and you will blow out your number. Maybe not right away, but it'll take time. But, over time, I promise you that if you start to behave and keep those kind of, grounding principles in your mind, I assure you are going to win, because what you have effectively done is you've changed or adjusted the way you sell to match how people want to buy.
And I think that using B2C as a way to contextualize B2B is a really helpful exercise. And I think it's one that we don't do nearly enough when we're looking ourselves in the mirror. You mentioned some good examples. I'll give you another one. Netflix, right? I hear about Netflix. I'm like, oh, cool. I want to go check it out. Maybe I'll use it, right? I show up on their website. What do they advertise? 1 month free, no credit card required. Click here to start your trial, right? Like, click a button, boom, I'm in. Now, can you do that with enterprise software? No, of course you can't, right? Because you're not going to be able to deploy some crazy BI tool that's going to look at like billions of records in your database and be able to like give you any sort of sense of value. Of course not, right? So I'm not saying that like, oh yeah, this is great for companies like Zoom and Slack and whatever, where like you can really just like click and buy. But you're not going to be able to do that with something that's complex. So what can you do? What I think you can do is Jill Rowley, who's one of my favorite people, she talks about this. She talks about a system of deposits and withdrawals. And she says, before you go to the bank to make a withdrawal, you got to make a deposit because, it doesn't work the other way. And I think sales is much the same, which is that, you get on the phone, hey, can I give you can I take 15 minutes of your time to learn about your business? No, you may not, right? You may not take 15 minutes of my time to learn about my business, to hear about my hiring needs, to discuss how we can help you. You may not do that. But if you find that I think you gave me this example previously about something that HubSpot does, and I have to admit that I'm a big fan of HubSpot's approach. I know, and I'm friends with Mark Roberge. I know Volpe and Joe Chernoff, and I know a lot of the gang from HubSpot. Great group of people. David Cancel and kind of the entire kind of HubSpot mafia is off doing some really amazing things. And one of the things that I think HubSpot delights in is the fact that they come at you not with a, hey, do you want to take a demo of our product? But they come at you with actually creating value for your business. And then inadvertently or as a secondary ask, they will then try to pitch you a product. And we don't need to be disingenuous here, right? I'm not saying like lie and don't be open about the fact that you're a salesperson. I'm just saying make a deposit first in the account before you make a withdrawal. And I'll give you an example of something that we did at a company that I worked at, which I thought was really great. And it was a very effective strategy for us. I used to work for a video advertising company, and we used to basically help you get more views on a video that you created, right? So that was the general concept. And so how would we approach people? Well, we built this diagnostic tool that would look at your video that you had posted on YouTube or whatever, and we'd looked at how many views it has, what is the average view time, how many social shares it has, how many people post on Twitter, and it would just basically look at the health score of your video. And we would email prospects not to say, hey, set up a meeting with us. But we'd say, hey, we ran a quick diagnostic of this video for you. We figured out that given the number of views that the video has and your average view time, here's what industry expectations would be in terms of social sharing. But as it turns out, you're a little bit behind, and it looks like you're doing really well on Facebook, but Twitter and these other channels are going less well for you, and blah, 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 blah. We compared it to this other video you ran a few months ago, and it looked like that one did a little better. Maybe here's a couple reasons why we think it might be this way. Want to shoot this over to you and see if it would be helpful. We'll have to chat if you're interested in video marketing solutions. And the response rate that we would get to that, I mean, was I think 600 to 700% better than any cold email I've ever written in my life ever. And
yeah, you made a fat deposit in the bank, right? You're saying, hey, like, here's a thing that might help you. Right?
Yes.
I've done some research on you. I already know about you. I've actually taken a step further and found something that you care about, and I've analyzed it for you, and here are the results. If this is a priority or something you want to chat about further or figure out, how you can improve this or whatever that is, whatever that call to action is, that's adding real value. I think that's one of the things that I hear so much about, and I think I've ranted about at different points. I try not to rant, but I don't know. I think it's just the way that I write tends to be ranty. I'm gonna work on that.
It's you and James Joyce.
I guess, yeah. So I just hear a lot of people saying stuff like, you got to add value, or like sales reps will say like, I add value, and I ask myself, I'm like, what is value? And I know we're getting into really like ethereal, philosophical space here.
Let's be there.
We can be there. Without getting too into it, I think obviously I think it's awesome. Like what you just gave as an example of real tangible value, that's it. Okay. Mm-hmm. My advice to anyone, unsolicited advice to anybody who's listening to this and saying, well, shit, like I don't have a diagnostic. I don't have an engineer that can build this thing for me. Mm-hmm. HubSpot, you guys have Website Grader, Sahil, this company you had, this video diagnostic. That's awesome. But guess what? I don't have that. Mm-hmm. Right. I'd say, okay, fine. What do you have? Well, one of the things that every single salesperson has is an extremely unique point of view if you are listening. Because if you've been doing your job, even if you've been doing it poorly, okay, for a year, 2 years, whatever amount of time you want to take, you are talking to tens, maybe hundreds, maybe even more people who your company should be serving, right? Or could be customers, already are customers, whatever. And so you sit at this really unique intersection of all these peers, right? So let's say you sell to heads of sales or heads of marketing, right? Maybe it's heads of marketing. You have tons and tons of conversation with heads of marketing every single day. Mm-hmm. And so if you're listening, you should actually have a pretty good sense, unless you're just saying, hey, you want a demo, do you want a demo, right? Instead, if you've actually asked a question and said like, yeah, like most companies I talk to are struggling with thing 1, 2, 3, to what extent has that come up within your organization, right? If you're listening, you're going to hear a bunch of unique perspectives about what other people are struggling with. Mm-hmm. And that in itself is the inherent value you can bring. It's the actual insight of and that synthesis of those tens or hundreds of conversations you've had, and to say, hey, look, like I know you're thinking about it that way, but over the last year I've talked to about 150 different CMOs, and frankly, what keeps them up at night is thing 1, 2, and 3. You said something that's more like 9 or 10 on most people's lists. Do you want me to share a little bit about what I've learned about how they're addressing thing 1, 2, and 3? We can kind of figure out if that's even a priority for you all right now.
Yeah, I love it. Or even if it's not that bold and all you do is just write down the things that people said, and Absolutely. You're like, you know what? You don't even need to synthesize it. You can just present the materials. Right? Yeah. You can literally be like, hey, I've had conversations with 150 CMOs over the course of the last year. Everyone that I talk to, I take out their name and their company because it's confidential information. But I anonymize it. But here are their top 3 biggest challenges that they face, and here's a couple of solutions and things that they're doing to fix it. Do you want me to just send you the document I have?
Yeah.
And just ship it over to them? I mean, that is something that Forrester will charge you like $100,000 for, exactly. Right? For the same shit. And
that's value. Yeah.
That is real value, right? You can quantify how much value that is.
Absolutely.
And I think that is such a so I'm so glad you brought that up, because it reminded me of something you said earlier, which was that your role as the analyst when you were first working at the corporate executive board versus the salesperson. I think we are in for another revolution in sales, which is already happening, but it's the rise of the sales engineer or the solutions engineer. And what I mean by that isn't so much that, on the one hand, yes, they should be more highly compensated, and that there should be more parity in the way that they're paid. And like, I believe in a lot of these things, but to the core of it, as a salesperson, you have to be a sales engineer now. It is not okay for you to be the quarterback of the deal and then hand the ball off to the solutions engineer and have them go run through the hole every time, right? That is no longer the job of the salesperson. Is no longer to call the play in the huddle, right? And to motion people around. Like, you got to be able to run with the ball, right? And if you're and what that means is you need to have deep knowledge of your product, to have deep knowledge of the competitors. You need to actually have used the product in production, not in a demo environment, in production. You need to have been responsible for the outcome that the product is driving. So yes, that means that if you are selling cybersecurity, that it definitely means that you need to go hang out. You may not be able to hang out with every single head of engineering, but I bet you have one at your own company. And I bet you could sit next to that person and say, hey, do you use our own product? You do, cool. Can you show me how it works? Can we try to hack our own system together? Can you even show me what it means to hack something? Can I practice hacking things in our system and be like, because then when you talk to the next head of engineering, you're not going to sound like a schmuck that's reading off the script, right? You're going to
walk a mile. You have to walk a mile in the customer's shoes. I mean, and I love that idea. I mean, like the closer you can get, and I know there's like multiple schools of thought on like selling style. Like I'm of the pain school. But the closer you can get to your customer's pain, the better you are fundamentally going to be at relating, expressing empathy, understanding what someone's day is like. And that, I mean, that's a whole different layer of trust, of getting someone's attention, of earning their respect. I totally love that idea. I mean, that walking a mile in so much. I'm sorry to interject there.
No, that's exactly right. I mean, and I'll tell you that I had the experience myself of having been a customer, and I think this is very similar to your experience at HubSpot, where I was a customer of a company called SalesPredict. And I'd used a bunch of other lead scoring platforms before, back to a rise of sales automation and the sales tech world. And then I became a customer of SalesPredict. I used the product for 3 or 4 months. I knew it wasn't perfect, but I knew what it did really well. And I knew it was better than what a lot of competitors offered. And then when they offered me a chance to come work at the company, even though I was running product marketing, I was still the person that they would call in right when a deal got really thorny, because they'd be like, all right, well, why don't you talk to Sahil, who's our product marketing person, but he also used to be a customer of our product, and he can actually show you how to really use it. And so I would come in and I would open up their Salesforce, and we would go in there and we'd start looking at leads and whatever. And by the end of it, the customer, you know, if it was a good fit, would be like, yeah, this is awesome. If it wasn't a good fit, I'd be like, yeah, dude, I wouldn't use this product for this either, right? Like, yeah, and it was just like very easy and natural. Now, that is the job of every salesperson today. I think in order to be an exceptional salesperson, you have to be able to do that. And I think the fact that you were a customer of HubSpot before you were a employee of HubSpot gives you the credibility and authority to say that. If you're a sales rep that's starting out in your career and you haven't had the opportunity to be a customer of the product that you're buying, or you're not the target customer, that's okay. That's okay too. But then as much as you can simulate that world, and until you can truly feel confidence that whatever it is that you are selling is something that you deeply understand, you're always going to sound extremely fake and untrustworthy.
Yeah, totally. I mean, totally agree with that. Just replicating that experience, understanding what, keeps that buyer up at night, how difficult it is to be them. Mm-hmm. Which I know is a really tough thing to wrap your mind around, but like, I think you're absolutely right. And I could not agree with you more that in terms of where I think sales is going, I think it's going a lot of places. I don't think it's a dying profession. I don't think it's, as cool as, believe me, like I thought the Google Duplex demo was just, wow. I loved it. I really did.
Yeah.
We got a ways to go. We got a ways, I think we're all right for at least a few more years. Hope. We'll see. But
it made a table, to be clear, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I have to just throw this in. The Google Duplex thing was awesome, But what it replicated is what you can do with 2 clicks on OpenTable. And I think we're a long ways away from being able to even do what you can do on OpenTable with a piece of enterprise software. So I'm not so worried about it either.
I mean, it'll probably be after we're long gone. I hope, but every generation before us has probably said that too. There's got to be one that's like stuck in the middle. It's like, crap, we're the ones that didn't die. Like, by now, I hope that's not the case. But I totally subscribe to your school of thought on this, Sahil. I mean, this is one of the things I tried. And I guess just because I'm nerdy, but I love the product. I was a customer. I loved HubSpot's product. I genuinely loved it. And one of the things I taught my sales team members when they came in, I said, nothing will replace superior product knowledge. Nothing. And some of them took it seriously and some didn't, and I agree that, there's, I don't know if you ever come across, so Pete Caputo was my old boss. And he's got this saying that goes something like this. It's like, it might only be relevant for tech companies, but maybe not. Maybe the whole world's becoming a tech company. I don't know. He says that in the future, engineers/product people are the new marketers. Marketers are the new salespeople, and salespeople are the new customer success engineers, so to speak. Right? And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And I think it also ties back into this notion of, intimately understanding your customer's pain, helping them be successful with whatever it is that they're trying to solve. Frankly, whether or not your solution helps them with that or not.
I love it. This has been such a great conversation, Sig. We just gotta do a weekly show with you. I mean, I feel like if we should just rename this thing into the Bryan Signorelli show. No. And we just have you come in. No, and I mean that very sincerely in the sense that I just think that, anybody who's listening to this is gonna look back and be like, man, there's a lot happening with our profession. It's not that you have all the answers. It's that you're asking the right questions. And I think that, where it really comes down to is that if you have never bought something, it is really hard to understand what goes through the mind of a buyer when you're a salesperson. And you can think that but you don't know. And it is only when you really know what goes through the mind of a buyer and what they're feeling and what they're truly thinking when they listen to your pitch and what they want out of a sales conversation that you can rise above the noise and become the type of salesperson that I think we all want to be. So, Bryan,
concluding thought. I like that.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I've really enjoyed it. And Bryan, if people want to reach out to you or have further questions, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
LinkedIn's great. Or if you, love Twitter, I weirdly have 2 Twitter handles. So just at Bryan Signorelli or at Inbound Seller. Either one of those is fine.
Okay.
LinkedIn is probably the preferred medium. So yeah, feel free to reach out.
Amazing. And again, the book is called Inbound Marketing.
Yeah, Inbound Selling.
Yeah. I was going to say inbound marketing in the modern context there, right?
Right. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, inbound selling.
It's the successor or sister or companion to the book Inbound Marketing that our co-founders Dharmesh and Brian Halligan wrote about 10 years ago. I mean, that's the way I've always kind of aspired or hoped it would kind of turn out. We'll see if it does. But yeah, Inbound Selling. Inbound selling, yeah, changing the way you sell to match how buyers buy. So I love it. Thank you so much for your time. You're so amazing, and I'm thrilled to count you as a friend. Cheers. Have a good one, man. Bye. You too.